I'm your host, Karan Kapoor, and I've had the opportunity to lead our risk and regulatory consulting and solutions team here at Delta Capita for the last 4 years. And I'm really proud of the work that we've done as a team, and we're happy to share our insights with yourselves through our podcast series. People who follow us on LinkedIn would have known that we have shared our insights on trends and challenges on key regulatory topics that are facing the market. And today we are trying to bring our opinions and thoughts to yourself in a slightly different way through our podcast series. Today we are going to be focusing on the Digital Operational Resilience Act, or DORA, as it's better known, as it has got about six months for go live and the deadline, whilst firms are also grappling with operational resilience, as that's also coming up from a deadline perspective. So I thought it'll be very useful for us to have a conversation about how firms are reacting and responding to the last few months left from a DORA standpoint, whilst also balancing the operational resilience activities. So today I'm going to be speaking to my colleagues about the topic and understand exactly what challenges these regulations do bring for the market, as well as which solutions are out there and how we are kind of like supporting the industry in general. So without further ado, let me go on to our first guest, Nick Wilcock, who's the head of our non-financial practice here at Delta Capita. Hello, Nick. How are you today? Why don't you introduce yourself, your role a little bit, but at the same time also why don't you shed some light on what is DORA and what are the key requirements that it brings to the firms that are impacted by the regulation?
Great, thanks Karen. So Nick Wilcock, I'm the head of non-financial risk practice here at Delta Capita. I've been with the firm about just over 6 years. Outside of Delta Capita, I'm an independent non-executive director of Saxo Bank, so I chair their risk committee amongst other things. In terms of DORA, so this important piece of legislation, it's first announced a couple of years ago now, and everybody needs to be compliant by January next year. The core requirement is really around monitoring and managing operational resilience in the financial sector. It impacts all EU domiciled entities, but also importantly their service providers. And just to kind of give a kind of sense of scale of that, that's roughly about 22,000 institutions when you add it all up. So that's the overview. It's a lot of work, quite a lot of significant change, but I'm sure we're going to talk about that in a minute. But as I say, a lot of firms, there's a fair amount of investment needs to be put into this.
Thank you, Nick. That was really useful. Now, moving on to the other guests on the panel as well, I would like to invite Neil to quickly introduce himself. Neil, I know you've been working with a number of different technology solutions in the market to bring something interesting to our clients here at Delta Capita as well. Why don't you give us a little bit of an overview of, are there solutions out there that would help the industry in general to comply with the DORA requirements as well as they can?
Cheers, Graham. Thank you. Neil Jones. I'm a compliance consultant for the last 25 years. I joined DC as a compliance SME in the regulatory and risk practice, supporting a number of our initiatives with a number of our teams across DORA, as you know, operational resilience, consumer duty, and other regulatory initiatives that we're looking at. Yeah, don't worry, you're actually in really safe hands with us. Not only do we have the compliance and the experience with our clients of implementing this, from everything from initial risk assessments through to continuity strategy execution, there are solutions out there that can help our clients accelerate what they need to do and also make life a lot easier. But like I said, we'll come to that a bit later if that's okay.
That's really useful, Neil. Obviously, you mentioned Tech Passport. I'm sure we'll come on to that later in the podcast as well. But before we do that, I would like to invite our final guest on the panel today, Lily, who's a principal consultant in the Risk and Reg team as well. Lily, I know you've been working on a lot of projects across multiple clients, not only on the DORA topic, but also on operational resilience. Do you want to just give a quick overview on, obviously first introduce yourself, but also give a quick overview on what have been your key focus areas at client projects?
I'm Liliana. I work under Karan's practice, actually, risk and regulatory. as a principal consultant. I've been with Delta Capita, I think, coming up to 3 years now in September, and really focused on the regulatory and risk space. I guess in terms of coming back to your question, one of the main focuses within reg space, or the areas that I worked with, was operational resilience, where I helped one of our clients to implement front-to-back operational resilience framework, which fitted into their risk solution. And then, there were things like making sure that there's a governance, that the senior management were accountable for some of the changes, and the regulatory requirement is that there is a certain amount of investment to ensure that, let's say, one service breaks down, there's no negative impact to the consumer or the end consumer. So that was operational resilience. In terms of DORA, I've been researching quite heavily the third-party management solutions that are out there in combination and collaboration with Neil. We've looked at various providers that could potentially help with a third-party aspect, because that's a very significant part to the DORA regulation. And in particular, looking at the ICT, and it's not enough to know the big players anymore. The clients, or our clients, or financial institutions, need to ensure that they are, and they've done their due diligence on their fourth or fifth party service providers. So I think that's, for me, that's one of the main problems that we are facing going forward. I think there's still a lot of focus on knowing the big, obvious ones like AWS, but there's very little solution at the moment out there in terms of going into the detail of what lies beneath a bit further down the line.
Since you raised, obviously you spoke a little bit about operational resilience, it would be really useful if you could help me and obviously our audience understand a little bit about what are the new challenges that DORA is bringing in for firms that need to be compliant with the regulation, because obviously there's some commonality between operational resilience and DORA. How are the two regulations being kind of like looked at from a organizational perspective, from a firm perspective in the industry, but also what are the incremental steps that people need to take to get DORA compliant as well, in addition to operational resilience?
I think the most innovative phase of DORA is the ICT. So, and again, third party, like I said, I think that's something that they're really honing down on. And again, looking at the fact that at the end of the solution, or having this implemented and being compliant, there is no negative impact on the consumer or the market overall, the financial market overall. So it's a lot to do with knowing your digital platforms, knowing your third-party providers, and hence why I think, going back to Neil's point earlier on, looking at, maybe providers that could help us assist our clients with a better due diligence and preparation to DORA. There's a solution, for example, Tech Passport, who is in particularly looking at the mapping of the ecosystem of clients, third-party providers.
Nick, can I come to you very quickly and just seek your opinions on what's new within DORA and what's old within DORA that we've already seen from a resilience perspective?
Yeah, what is interesting is, all of the regulators are looking at resilience, right? So when we think about DORA, it's part of an overarching picture. We had the PRA and FCA here, you've had Australia, Singapore, the Fed are doing some work as well. And there's common things across all of them, but there are wrinkles, within DORA, which makes it a bit different. We just touched upon, the fact that it extends into third party and beyond. There's some technical standards that have just come out. There's a register that everybody needs to populate. You need to engage with your service providers to fill all of that out. The regulator's being very formulaic around instant reporting and set some standards around it, and the 3 stages of instant reporting. Again, you need to have dialogue with the third party around that. They're very much encouraging an open book approach to incidents. So they want that dialogue between banks and regulators around issues. I suppose you don't, in the past you had an issue, you didn't really tell anybody, and apart from your single regulator, they want sharing of information. They probably define things like critical incidents, which, probably people haven't really done before. That's important. And there's just very much a focus with all of this legislation around stress testing, definition, and the way, the way you think about it. So, in summary, there's a lot of legislation out there. DORA feels like it's the same thing, but it isn't. There's some wrinkles in there that are, as I said before, very different, and firms need to focus on that. And the fact that some of the technical standards have only just come out in July, and with the January date, coming quite quickly, there's quite a lot of work I think that firms need to sort of, get going, or if they haven't started already, to fill those requirements.
And that's where there's some good news, though, from what's happened in the past with OpsWares and the previous evolution, where people have started down that track. They've started building the frameworks and their risk mechanisms. So they're not starting from absolute scratch into DORA. They've got a starting block, and they've already been doing it for a couple of years. So you've got the next evolution now taken into that digital world. And there's things that already exist. For example, in the governance space, we've already got business continuity plans and strategies. However, now DORA, for example, wants you to have a managing body that is accountable for that framework and maintains that framework. So it just sort of takes that next step. It adds on another block onto the OpsWares. So it's adding a little extra. But saying that, we've got some existing things that already support that. So it's kind of let's just take it to the next step and make it better than what we've done in the past. And because it's now a pan-European, it feels as though we're evolving.
I think the reuse is a really important point, Nick, and Neil, I think it's good that you actually raised it. However, firms, if they just assume it's operational resilience again, I think that's I think you continue to look at it with a fresh pair of eyes, particularly with those standards that have just been published. But you're right.
I think in
There's 2 points there.
In addition, I guess it's our clients knowing the differences and understanding what the new regulation, how it fits into the rest of the framework, because there's so many risk frameworks out there and compliance frameworks. I think one of the biggest challenges, going back to the challenges that some of our clients may have, is looking at this holistically, and rather than having various departments doing the same thing, understanding the overall holistic view of the framework and how best to fit it all in, and becoming compliant, whether it's operation resilience or DORA or third-party regime. And I think that's something where Delta Capita can step in and do a great amount of work and supporting.
Oh, that was really useful, Lily. Thank you. Now moving on to a little bit of more practical steps that the industry needs to take in order to get compliant with DORA as well. I would like to ask Nick, when I've been speaking to people who are dealing with the compliance efforts on either of these two legislations, one question that keeps coming up is, what's the most optimal way of making sure that, to the point that we made earlier about reusing stuff that you already have, whether with BCP, whether it be with resilience, and how do we then frame the DORA efforts accordingly? So what's the optimal framework, in your opinion, Nick, that brings the resiliency requirements and the DORA requirements into one?
So it really touches upon what I think we said a bit earlier, right, around balance between reuse and actually looking at the legislation with fresh eyes. So, firms have done a lot of work through operational resilience around policies and procedures and governance and all of that. If you've done a good job, I think is fine, right? I think that I think is firmly kind of bedded in. So the focus therefore needs to be on things which are different, and one of which, as I said before, is the incident management side of things. It is much more formulaic in terms of the reporting. But even more important than that is that whole third party and beyond supply chain set of requirements. There's a register you need to complete. And there's a fair amount of dialogue you need to have with your critical third parties. And that dialogue needs to be ongoing, right? It's not just about filling out a form, but it's really about how you get comfortable about resiliency testing and their approach to resiliency and their incident management reporting And if there was an incident, who was going to do the incident reporting to the regulator? There's a lot of discussions need to take place. Funnily enough, I think when I talk to people, people talk often about the same third party, Amazon Web Services, whoever it may be, right? Where people, I think, are more worried is where they have a third party that is specific to them. So really, it's kind of almost like risk rating your third parties and understanding that supply chain. But in summary, really try and understand what the differences are. Focus your efforts on those. Make sure the work you've done before is sufficient for to cover for the legislation asks you to do.
To that, Nick, I think that you're right. I think we need to make sure that people don't forget there are some new bits here with DORA. I mean, 3 particular areas you look at, for example. You need to enhance your ICT management framework. You need to think about your third-party risk management, get that really tight. And then you're sort of looking at your ops res and making sure that you do your appropriate levels of testing to see where you are down the journey and make sure that you've got those risks known and managed.
Yeah, I think in addition to the old operation resilience regulation, if I may say old, is that when it comes to DORA, you really look into the testing from a threat-led penetration testing view. So just using old scenarios and lifting them into DORA and using the same is not good enough anymore. You have to look at it from a cyber perspective. I mean, we've seen what happened at Microsoft a few weeks ago or months ago, and the effect that it had, using old material and then maybe tweaking it a little bit is not enough. It has to be cyber-led and threat-led.
Yes. Seems like a lot of effort needs to be put onto third-party management, the risks that brings, and we've heard that term being used many times in this conversation. Neil, I would like to come to yourself and ask, what can firms do to strengthen their third-party risk management processes and frameworks?
Caught up with a couple of our PMs last week in the town hall that are working on DORA with the clients, and they're actually grappling with very similar problems with the level of data that they need to capture from those third parties, how to manage it quickly and efficiently, but how can they accelerate that with maybe a third-party fintech? And what I mean by that, for example, if we're just looking at just a very simple scenario of just 10 third parties providers to one company, if you then do the downward chain into their fourth and fifth parties, that can account to around 130 separate spreadsheets to manage that chain. So what we're trying to do is, what we're trying to help our clients with is looking at those different accelerators that are out there to capture that data in the first place, but also how to maintain that data. That's key to this, as Lily alluded to. You need to keep it real time, you need to keep it maintained, and you need to keep it up to date. And you need a tech support or a fintech solution that will allow you to do that. Like I said, I mentioned 130 spreadsheets. We worked down through the analysis and based on the requirements for the reporting. It works out you'd need probably 2 FTE, cost of around 75,000 a year to manage something that small. We've got one client that we know of that's taking 4,000 ICTs into the system. Imagine how much that's going to cost. So yes, there's a definitive saving you could make with an accelerator.
That's really useful as well. And can I check that this is something that we are actively, working with our clients to try and help them understand how they manage this better, and obviously working with our partners at Tech Passport as well.
Absolutely. We've looked as Lily and I have done the research, and we've been looking with a number of partners. There are sort of some differentiators, and one that Tech Passport brings to the table that maybe others don't, is that data updating. For example, as more people get onto the platform, every third party, fourth party in the chain will be updating their details and providing it into the platform. Now that will happen for different financial institutions at different times throughout the year. So what happens is that for want of a better word, dataverse of third parties will be constantly maintained, constantly updated, and it'll be scheduled with other with other financial institutions. So you join it, they join it, somebody else joins it, that data will constantly be live.
Yeah.
So you'll always know where that business is sitting, and you'll have a full report of that information because it's based within the...
Seems like quite a useful tool. That's really useful. Thank you, Neil. Obviously, going back to the actual name of the regulation, it is Digital Operational Resilience Act. So there's a huge focus on digital. So coming to more of the technology aspects, and I'm quite inquisitive and intrigued to know more about like the ICT angles. Lily, if I come to you, and also you mentioned stuff about cyber testing, etc. Can you just give us a little bit of like your experiences on the ICT angle and what people can do from a managing the technology risks or also managing things like cyber risk under the DORA regulation?
First of all, you have to work quite closely with your disaster recovery teams or your ICT teams. There's a requirement of mapping your critical technical assets. The same as we did for Operation Resilience, we mapped our critical business services. So understanding where would the company come to a halt, would one of the services collapse or not work. You need to do the same with analysis from a kind of ICT third-party provider viewpoint. I think that's one of the main focus points, and I think that's also one of the main areas where our clients are lacking behind.
Thank you, Lily. That was really useful. Right, moving on to Nick, yourself, obviously, and I'm going to pick on your role as a non-executive director as well at another organization. In terms of reporting and monitoring, I hear there's lots of requirements for firms to properly monitor and report incidents and other aspects around DORA controls to the board and beyond. What is your opinions on how firms should be approaching that, and what are the key requirements that need to be kept in mind?
Firms struggle a little bit with this as well in terms of what level of reporting do you do? Is it the board? Is it the risk committee? What structure do you put underneath? And these sorts of things. I do a read across to other legislation, like consumer duty. I thought the whole idea of the consumer duty champion was excellent, and if people want to replicate that with this piece of legislation, or more generally with operational resilience, I think that's a good way of bridging all the requirements to the team that actually are implementing, DORA and broader resiliency. The escalation protocol and understanding who the true owners are. With DORA, you don't have the SMF regime, but I mean, there is a lot of, when you look at the actual legislation, you read it, there's a lot about accountability, there's a lot about ownership and having that structure in place. In terms of the actual level of reporting, there's a reporting within the firm, and I think getting that whole escalation protocol agreed right up front. But what is interesting, as I think I said earlier, is the actual communication with the broader financial sector when you have an incident, right? That transparency, and some of it's voluntary as well. I mean, they have for the first time said if you have a cyber incident, is voluntary reporting, not just the hard and fast regulations. There's voluntary reporting that you need to do. I think in terms of board level, need to be engaged, need to understand how, where and when they're going to get the reports. Personally, I think risk committees are probably the right place, but often there is, technology committees that will oversee this stuff, etc.
And is it safe to kind of like say that DORA, obviously, and operational resilience does bring in an element of industry collaboration, just to make sure that there's a common understanding of incidents and risks out there, so that the industry in general and as a whole can be better prepared? Yeah,
you're right, but it's a broader collaborative effort if you think about it, because they even allow your third party to do the incident reporting on your behalf. Because if it's a sector-wide incident, for instance, whichever supplier it is, they may well be, rather than 40 banks or whatever having to report into 5 different regulators, there's that option as well. So I think collaboration is right at the heart of this legislation, absolutely. It's bank to regulator, it's bank to bank, it's third party to bank and regulator. They're trying to introduce much more transparency around the whole theme of resiliency and recovery.
I think you're spot on there. It's building those relationships, building that communication, breaking down those barriers, breaking down those walls, so that you can share that information quickly proactively and stop, prevent, and make sure at the end of the day the consumer is impacted the least. That's the idea. So I think you're absolutely right. Relationships are even more important now as we get to more of a digital world.
That was really useful. Really useful to understand what the requirements of DORA are, how they kind of like overlap and not overlap with operational resilience, and also what clients and firms out there are doing to address some of these challenges. That really kind of like helped me understand that quite well. Now, moving on to maybe the final segment of our podcast here is how are Delta Capita helping our clients with this legislation and helping them be compliant. And it'll be really useful to understand, and I'm sure the audience will also like to understand some of your own personal experiences of working on this topic for our clients on the ground as well. So why don't we start with yourself, Lily, and give us a little bit of a flavor of what you're doing, how are you doing it, and how is that helping our clients?
Yeah, I guess going back to my operational resilience engagement with one of our clients, it was literally creating something simple as a regulatory matrix, a traceability matrix where you had the regulation broken down into a spreadsheet and then looking at the requirements per domain, per business line, and then also finding the appropriate stakeholders for it. So you have, at this moment in time, there should be accountability for some of these activities. Often internally there isn't. That's a completely different scenario because, again, when it comes to reporting, you need to make sure all this is in place. And then things like gap analysis, putting together the governance framework, and helping them with a methodology and a target operating model in terms of seeing where are they now, where do they need to be in January, and then plugging exposing the gaps, and then helping them with the remediation of those gaps.
That sounds like very fundamental way of reaching compliance, but often needs a lot of effort. So thank you, Lily, for your efforts in that space, because it tends to be more than it sounds like as well. Right, Nick, moving on to yourself as well, right? I'm sure you advise clients on numerous topics as well. So it's really useful to understand, what are the key things that you've been telling our clients in terms of DORA compliance and the road forward.
Oh, and I've touched upon a lot of it already, right? The right level of reporting and the board engagement and the whole top-down thing. So the additional thing I would add, though, is the beyond January, actually, is the embedding, because this is a continuous journey. And, firms are having to move, particularly on the testing side of things, from desktop testing to automation, testing schedules that go on beyond what they would have done in the past, and making this really an authentic thing, and really also taking a look at their scenarios. I mean, feedback I'm getting, at the moment around scenarios is, and secondhand from regulators, is that, some of these scenarios aren't actually severe enough, or you're not using independent checks around your scenarios, the kind of red hat, blue hat type stuff. So just helping people and firms really think about that embedding beyond, and this is beyond the training and all this, the updating of policies on a regular basis, are things that firms would do with any regulation that comes out, but really honing in on that testing side of things.
Thank you, Nick. And obviously, last but not least, Neil, I know you've focused a lot on technology when it comes to resilience and DORA of late as well. So maybe getting to yourself to understand a little bit more about how have clients actually adopted the technology solution that you was talking about. I'm assuming that's on that tech passport with the third party management. How's the experience been of working with the third party technology platform, and how are clients kind of receiving that?
There's two aspects. The first one, to Lily's point, the gathering that data and having all that information to hand. The tech passport, once you've loaded all that data in, one, it gives you a full visualization of your risk concentrations, because you can see where your pain points are or where your potential pain points could be, which allows you to take that proactive engagement. It allows you to take your communication. It allows you to talk to other people that are also in that chain, so you can start building out mitigations, building out incident plans. You've also got, it allows you to do your communication, because it allows a clear line of sight all the way through it. But more importantly, as to Lisa's point about the traditional way of going around compliance, the database has all of that already loaded in it. So you don't have to start from scratch. You don't have to do your traceability matrices and map all your systems, because all of that's in there. Once you load your third parties in, you categorize it, the system does it for you. So the system will tell you what your risk map looks like. It'll also tell you when you've last updated, when you've done your contracts with different people, who their third parties, their fourth and fifth parties are, when they were contacted. So it gives you a full management system with a single platform. It's a brilliant little system because it allows a really user-friendly interface so you can see where you are. And I think that's the big one our clients have been grappling with, because the size potentially of DORA and it going across borders, across countries and so on, is getting that single view, having that capability to know where your risks are and to be able to report it.
And can you share some initial early client feedback on your experiences of implementing this kit, because it sounds really useful, and in real life as well, has it really added value to our clients from your own personal experience?
Absolutely. I mean, just in looking at most firms want to look at the bottom line and the cost savings alone. The amount of time taken to load the data in compared to what you were doing on your spreadsheet, we've already loaded into one client around 100 suppliers, which very simply it took us about a week of actual activity. But what that will now save down the line is potentially around 1,300 spreadsheets. So straight away, you can see where the technology-led solution is going to help the client save time, effort, and energy, as well as keeping them compliant.
Yeah. I mean, there's one golden rule of operational resilience to be to get rid of all spreadsheets in the first place. It's unbelievable how much important critical work is done still based out of spreadsheets, which is more than a risk, I would say. That's been really useful, and thank you all for your time today. That's all we've got time for today, and hopefully that conversation helped you get a little bit of more understanding of the DORA requirements, the operational resilience requirements, and obviously what the industry still needs to do in the next few months to get to compliance, and obviously what the team here at Delta Capita have been working on the ground as well. So hopefully that was useful, and this was the first of this series, and we will see you at the next one.